Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Right Talk Wednesday. I'm your host, Kit Kilstow, and I'm here today with science fiction author Chuck Rothman. And we're going to talk about his work, his writing, find out a little bit about an upcoming novel. And of course, as always, all of those links will be in the show notes, which will be available on whatever platform you're hearing my voice on. And I'll let Chuck just tell you all a little bit about himself. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, kid. Um, well, a little bit about myself. I'm not good at talking about myself. I've basically been writing science fiction and fantasy since the 80s. And I had some success back then, and John's changing, and I'm trying to keep up with it. So I'm very happy that my latest or is come is has found a publisher, and will soon be coming out. I don't have any dates because it was like 2 weeks ago I first heard the okay. Basically, I've been writing it since the early 80s. I started writing science fiction, sending stories off to George Sithers at Asimov's. He was very encouraging. The first story fourth story I sent to him, he wrote on the rejection, "We'd like to see more of your work." So I hearing that was certainly the greatest incentive I could find. So I went and kept writing. Eventually sold a story to him. He said he'd buy it if I made a few small changes. I rewrote it 3 times, and then those were the small changes, and he finally bought it, and then left the magazine. He was gone by the time I was published. But then I wrote a novel, which eventually got published too in the early 80s, and did a lot of short story work and so on. I'm kind of proud that I've been both in Asimov's fantasy and science fiction analog and even a form of galaxy. So the major digests have at least at one point included stories of mine. Um, Other than that, I spent most of the last years working at a college, Siena College in upstate New York near Albany. I was one of their IT people. I made sure, that people mostly changed their passwords correctly. That was most of the issues, but also I was there when we were doing everything online for COVID, and there was a lot of work with that involved, getting the classroom set up for it. And some of the students weren't too bad dealing with it, but some of the professors just were not used to computers. And unfortunately we had a couple of systems. So there was one guy who would call us every class and say, "How does this work again?" But that was fine. I retired a couple of years ago, and I've been working on writing ever since. Let's see. That's pretty much my life. I'm also been involved in science fiction conventions. I started with being invited to do Albicon back in '96, and I've been doing Albicon regularly ever since then. I've been on the committee most years, usually running programming. And I ran programming for Astronomicon a couple of years ago. Well, I guess let's see, a year ago. It was the last one they held, which got me hooked into doing programming for the Buffalo NASFIC, so which was a lot of work. So, but it
I can
ended up,
imagine.
yeah, I ended up getting very nothing but good comments on it. My favorite was in the gripe session. Someone said the big problem was that she would always see two or three things she wanted to see at any given time, and she had to decide. And I said that was really my goal. I didn't want people to go for 3 hours with nothing they wanted to see. So that was a success. I'm doing Albicon as Conchair this year, and I've been sort of busy in that aspect. So that's
So,
yeah.
yeah, I just gonna say that all sounds fascinating and wonderful. And I want to just put in for some of our younger listeners or viewers, um, back when I started writing as well, it is a big thing. I just want to point out just how absolutely awesome it is that you've had stories in Asimov's and fantasy and science fiction and analog and the form of galaxy, because back when I started writing, those were the dream places to go. And I have rejection letters. I don't have stories there, but I have rejection letters. Um, and the other thing is getting an editor, especially back in those days, to write, we want to see more of your work. That that's a gold star right there.
Yeah, well, George Scissors was very he was very big on developing new talent. And he was one thing he did, which I don't think anyone ever did or on a regular basis. I guess some of the John Campbell probably did, but he would explain what was wrong with the story. So he would say this is, and he even the ones that were just form rejections, the form had a check off this, and you were able to see what he thought was wrong with it, and where you can work on things for the next story. So he was very good for encouraging new people to get involved with writing. Nowadays, no one does that.
No, I ran a well, I still run a publisher. So, and, I would love to do that. But one of the things that I have found is that with the rise of the internet, quite often if you say, hey, I liked your story, but this didn't work for me, you get a reply back.
Hmm.
And that reply usually isn't very nice. And it's like, so I think editors have really backed away from that as the culture has shifted because yeah, I don't want to get into reminiscing about the good old days because there's plenty that's great about the publishing community now. But
Hmm.
there really was, I think, back when I started like the early to mid 90s.
Right.
And even back then there was really an emphasis, I think, on teaching and development and bringing up young writers that is it's still there today, but I think it's harder to find.
Yeah, you're probably right. I mean, I get more form rejections than I did back in the 80s, and I think people just don't have the time to write personal stuff and do that. And you also have a good point because I've seen other editors of small presses saying the same thing. They reject someone, and the guy person gets back to them and starts calling them names, or and I mean, and which makes no sense whatsoever. What good is it? I mean, how's that going to help you if you start yelling at the editor for being an idiot for not taking his story? I mean, it's not like they're going to be in favor of your story the next time it shows up.
Very true. Very true.
Hey,
There,
there's no reason to piss off an editor, and yeah, it may be good for a few minutes, but that means if you ever send anything again to that editor, the editor's going to remember and get a quick rejection, and no comments because they don't want to have to deal with um, another tirade on email tirade.
yeah, there are lists. There are lists. So yeah.
Well, yeah, because the editors talk amongst themselves and they say, "Oh, man, I had this guy. Oh, I know that guy. I had that sort of thing happens." But yeah, there's really basically if it's a rejection, if they've completely missed your story, just say, "Oh well, they completely missed my story. Maybe there's a way I can make it more obvious, or maybe there's a better market for it." I mean, I've sold stories that have been rejected in 8, 10, 20 markets, and then I found the right one. So one of them turned out to be in some ways my most successful story because it sold, it was in anthologies, and it had been directed many times. It just took a while to find the right editor. So it's really no, you just keep trying. You send it off, and sooner or later someone's gonna like it, or maybe they never will. But that's why you write something else.
Yeah, that was one of the earliest lessons I think that I was able to get imparted probably at a science fiction convention. And I want to talk about those. But was 9 times out of 10, the rejection has nothing to do with you or your story. It's a fit issue,
Mhm.
especially um, I've written a lot of romance novels, and so a lot of it is I just bought a book with the same trope in it. I just, we just filled, all of these different types of books that you're writing, and
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it, and it feels so personal when you get rejected. I think it helps to remember that sometimes it's just a fit issue and it has nothing to do with you or your story.
I know once I sent the story off to Analog and they wrote back to me and says, "Well, this is very similar to a story we're going to publish in in the next issue." I say, okay, that's life. I eventually sold it elsewhere, but you can't get mad about it because there's nothing you do. It's not worth the blood pressure.
Definitely. So let's talk about your writing.
Hmm.
Um, your the novel that you just sold, The Cadaver Princess, which is going to come out from Experimenter Publishing, which is part of Amazing Stories. That novel is set in London, 1831. Looks really interesting. I don't want to give too much away. There's a blurb that'll be in the show notes, but it involves body snatching and medical schools and dark forces and ancient wizards. Um, I tend to think of, like, when you say Asimovs, I tend to think of more what we used to call hard science fiction or more technical science fiction. Do you, it sounds like you write kind of throughout the entire speculative fiction genre.
Well, I've over the years I got more into writing what I call hidden historical fantasy, where it's a historical fantasy with all the elements of fantasy, but it's not anything that changes history. I sort of got the idea from reading one of my favorite novels, John Barth's The Saltweed Factor, which is a fantastic novel, all based upon a few real people. The hero is who is a poet who is named and is an actual person who was around at the time of the novel. So I was sort of trying to do that. This particular one came out of um, a um, a comment. Matthew Foster that does reviews of film. He was talking about the Body Snatcher, and he made the comment there were more movies about Victorian body snatchers than there were Victorian body snatchers. Well, that's that's true because by the time Victoria came to the throne, they stamped it out. But prior to that, there was a lot of body snatching, and this was based on a book I'd read previously called The Italian Boy, which discussed a particularly notorious group of body snatchers in London who finally changed the laws because they were killing people. They weren't just digging up bodies; they were making their own supply. And as a matter of fact, those characters are very throughout the book. They're one of the subplots. But so I decided I'd write a novel about them, and it just I have a element. Whenever I write something, I have to have fantasy elements in it, and it suddenly popped in uh, from the first scene where we had the body being brought to the slab, and suddenly she sits up and is alive, although is dead. I'm so sorry, dead and still walking around, and that's really where the novel came from. I just wrote it from there.
That sounds fascinating. And I don't know, for me, my fantasy is contemporary fantasy. So yeah, it's just there's a layer of magic and that's kind
Mhm.
in mythology and everything that's in our own world. And for me, I think that's, I mean, I love the fantasy that's a different world. I love the historical stuff that's completely different, alternate history. But I think that I'm losing my words here, but I think it's very interesting to read things like that where it's a historical, it's fantasy, but it's not, you're not changing history. You're not, it's just kind of layered in there. It's like something that we don't know.
Yeah, someone pointed out that Tim Powers did this a lot. And I actually had read his stuff and hadn't thought of that when I was writing this. Someone just pointed out, oh, this sounds like Tim Powers. I said, oh yeah, that's a lot of his stuff. A lot of his stuff were pretty much where I was going. I like the idea. Well, I was always into history. So like in college, I was a history major, and I always liked reading about history, and the idea several novels ago was to write a historical novel uh, and see what happens with it. Because I never, when I start something, I just pick the place and start writing about it, and I don't plan anything, and it just sort of falls into place as I work on it. So that particular one was set in the 30s in New York, and the Empire State Building was an important thing with it. And yeah, so I started reading up, and there was this book on the Empire State Building, and I read the first paragraph. I said, "Oh, damn!" because it said it starts out by the Empire State Building. We mean the building on where is it? 34th Street and Fifth Avenue in New York. And I'm thinking, what the hell are they talking about? And then the guy says, there's a second Empire State Building in New York City. I said, whoa, this is where I'm going to build my novel.
Cool. I didn't know that.
No, no one knows that. It's I think 360 Broadway. They for years they hid the name, but lately they've been bringing it back, and it's there's a Swatch watch store there it's still there. It was built for the Empire State Bank about in the 1890s or so, and they so but yeah, there's that one, but obviously nobody knows about it because it's just, if you look at it, it's just a pretty not nondescript office building. But it's been around. That's the official title of it, and it was never changed. I used to have, and I think when I was looking at it, which several years ago, they had hidden any reference to it. But I think they put it back so that they're sort of using the name.
And this is why I do this podcast, because I always learn like absolutely amazing, wonderful things from the people I talk to.
Oh, well,
So
the other one I'm doing is set in Paraguay, and Paraguay has a great national hero of an American president. You're not going to guess. No one
no,
can ever guess.
I probably wouldn't. I'm not a history person.
Well, if you went through the list of presidents, you wouldn't guess. It's Rutherford B. Hayes.
Nope, wouldn't have guessed that.
Nobody would guess that. Hayes was president during a war. They had a question about who owned the land, and they asked him to arbitrate. And the arbitrator gave the land to Paraguay, which is about half the country and double the size of the country. And so he's a big hero in Paraguay. They named the whole province after him. And it's like they can't believe that Americans don't think much about him. He's one of the least remembered presidents. So I love that sort of weird sort of history, and that's what I'm sort of going with this novel and the other things I'm working on.
And I feel like, somebody parroted that old phrase to me again, write what you know. And to me, it's not so much write what I know, because we have encyclopedias at our fingertips now. We have research. We can reach out to people. It's write what you love. And if you write what you love, you're going to keep going, and you're going to keep trying those new markets, and you're going to persevere.
I've actually said that. Yes, write what you love. And the thing is, this thing here, the Cadaver Princess, I knew nothing about the time period, other than that one book I read about body snatchers. But I didn't know. I had to look up who was king. I had to look up, how things were working. I had to do a lot of research to find the historical period. But of course, I love doing that. I love looking things up. I love finding out facts. So that worked out very well. That made it work very well. So I really enjoyed putting that together.
Good. Well, I want to spend some time here also talking about conventions. And
Hmm.
again, for our listeners who may not have been in the convention scene or may not be a part of that, NASFIC, if I'm remembering correctly, is the North American Science Fiction Convention,
Right,
which occurs when Worldcon is not in the US.
right.
Okay, I got that right.
Yeah, that's correct.
It's
Uh,
it's it's been a while.
yeah, I mean, this was this year actually, back in July. The Worldcon was in Glasgow, so
Hmm.
the NASFIC Buffalo decided to do a NASFIC, It's not as big as the World Con. We had like about 700 people. But it was bigger than any convention I've worked on, which most I ever had was 400. And it gets more complex these days because you have to worry about virtual guests. I mean, before the internet, everyone was there at the convention. Now, most conventions have people who show up and, but without actually being there, they're doing it via Zoom. We do that at Albacon. That's in Albany, and we get, we try to make that fully hybrid. So we have both online people and people at the convention, and we managed to run them both, and it's tricky. We managed to do it, but the NASFIC's a big one. And my job was to put together the programming. We had to have something to do each, and programs usually run an hour, although I think some of the virtual programming ran a little longer in order to give time to like an hour. And well, I have to remember there was more space between them because they had to set up everything. The setup, for in-person panels, just get everyone to leave and have everyone sit down. When you're doing it virtually, then you have a little more complicated things. You have to worry about miking and everything else, and it was tricky to do. I didn't have to handle the technical part. The technical people were um, very good. They were the heart of making it all work. But my idea, my goal was to come up with ideas for panels and ideas for how to schedule them, and have notify everyone so they knew what was going on. And I've been doing this doing panels for a long time. I used to, I still do. I brainstorm ideas and ask other people to brainstorm. We get them all, and then we send them out to the people who are going to show up, the programming people on the program, and they pick which they want to be on. And then as program director, I choose usually the ones with the most interest. Because first of all, you can't run a panel if nobody's interested. You don't just assign people and they're not interested. That's not going to work. So people who people would say, I want to be on this, that, and the other thing. And I'd say, oh, there are 10 people want to be in this panel. We're definitely going to run it. You don't get all 10 on it because it gets, you won't, there's an optimum number, maybe between 4 to 6. But, you would, okay, not put them all on, put everyone on panels they want to be on. But at the same time, if a lot of people want to be on a particular panel, that's one that runs. And then there are readings and autographings, which also you have to schedule and find out. So yeah, but there's a lot to do with it. And when you're doing something as big as the NASFIC, it's a lot of work.
I can't imagine. Before we moved where we live now, we lived in Des Moines.
Mhm.
And while I wasn't able to be involved as much as I have, they put on DemiCon every year.
Mhm.
And but I got to, it's a small group, so you get to know who the concom is and
Right.
programming. And I was always just amazed at the level of work that went into that. And that is the one thing. I am 4 hours away from everywhere. And with the farm and stuff, I can't get away. And that is the one thing I miss because I used to do um, Icon in Iowa City and DemiCon and then come down to Kansas City for Conquest and kind of, you had your year planned out because you did cons back in the day. And I'm glad to hear you mention hybrid conventions because that is something that I know quite a few people in my communities would be interested in doing, but it seemed like kind of within the last couple of years, we heard that a lot of that was going away.
No, I think, well, I mean, I don't know. It is, the problem is you need the technical people. And, we've been doing it fully hybrid at Albacon for 3 or 4 years. Actually at sometime after after COVID, the first year after COVID, we did it fully online. And then we started doing it hybrid. The difficulty, and someone said, "Oh, we could do this. It'd be easier if you had a bigger convention." And the guy who did the text said, "No, we're at the right size because we only have 2 tracks of programming, and when you're dealing with plus readings, 2 tracks of programming plus reading, and so." That means only 3 rooms have to be set up this way. And the people to run it, it's easier to get staff to run 3 rooms. When we did it at the NASFIC, although we did do it, there was also non-hybrid programming. There were events that were just for attend programs that for just for that. Of course, a real advantage we were able to do is several of our guests were from Nigeria and I think South Africa, no, Ghana, I guess. But anyway, they're from Africa. And you couldn't get them, you couldn't afford to bring them over here for a convention, even as big as that. But as being virtual guests, they can interact, they can give a speech, they can be on panels, and people, and they really it sort of expands the pool of people who be there, and people maybe I don't know, but it could have been their fans in their home country could have watched, their fans in Europe could have seen. I mean, the only big problem with programming is remembering time zones.
Yeah,
I mean, it's like,
mhm.
it's 4 in the morning there. What do you? Oh, right.
I just got done actually trying to schedule some podcast recordings for people on the other side of the world. And it's like, okay, we can do it here because it's like Friday for me and Saturday for you. And yeah, the one big virtual convention that I need to actually talking about this reminds me I need to reconnect with them. They do like 24-hour programming to accommodate those people.
Ah,
And I'm just like, wow. I mean, the calendars that they have set up are absolutely amazing for knowing when you're supposed to be somewhere. And yeah, the internet has a lot going for it. And I love the communities that have been built up here on the internet. But my first experience of going to a convention, I've got to say there's nothing like it. Being around people, being in those panel rooms, being able to see, authors. At that time I was just starting out. So, um, being able to talk to authors like Joe Haldeman and some of the bigger names and stuff, face to face and have them just be, regular people. There's,
right. Yeah, that is that. I like. I mean, what was very funny. The first convention I went to was it's called Novacon 9 West in '79, and I'm there. I'm going there, and I turn around, and sitting behind me is Hal Clement. And I'm sort of saying, "Oh my, how kind of big name in science fiction," and I'm all starstruck. When I went to the next one, by that time I published a short story, and I was seeing little kids giving me that same look. They didn't know who he was, but they knew I was an author. Oh, but unfortunately, what's happening is uh, people are more, especially newer fans, are more likely to go to something like a Comic-Con or a media con as opposed to a traditional science fiction literary con. And even though we have a lot of media oriented panels and media oriented, but media guests are a problem because they all want fees, whereas the panelists usually are willing to do it just to meet people. Go to the party and meet people. People don't realize the older conventions are more a party, and
oh yeah.
yeah, so you socialize, you meet people, you make a lot of friends there, and I know there are people. I remember years ago when I was going much more regularly. There was someone who we'd meet every convention, and you'd see them a month later at another convention, and then 6 months later at a third convention, and you sort of would pick it up and talk and chat. So it was very good as a social experience.
Pro tip, if you want to sleep, don't get a room on the party floor.
Oh no. I actually had one at the NASFIC, but it turned out that I wasn't near any of the loud parties, so I was fine. But yeah,
Oh,
I'm not, the days when I would be partying till 4 a.m. are long past me.
yeah, same here. The last time I did that, I had a room next to somebody who did karaoke.
Oh,
And I mean, it was fun to listen to, but it was also like, okay, it's like 2 in
yeah.
the morning. We'd like to sleep now.
Yeah. I mean, remember I actually volunteered to be on the party floor because they needed to, for the hotel, they needed to fill the floor. So I said, oh, what the heck? And turned out it's next door to this group that was doing anime. I said, oh no, that's the worst thing. And my bed is right by the thing. But it turned out they were pretty quiet. They were more chatting. They might have been running an anime thing, but they were mostly just talking about it quietly. So it never was a problem. So it was I mean, I like the socialization. I like the thing, fun. Of course, I like the fact that, I'm able to get on a panel and talk about whatever I'm interested in. And that was, I've been really into the conventions. It just, for various reasons, it's been hard to get to them lately.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's it too. The those of us, the generations who actually, did a lot of those works on the conventions and stuff, we are reaching the point where we can't, go off on a weekend and travel and
Mhm.
and do that with things. And yeah, I think that's changed too.
Yeah. I mean, things worked out well for Buffalo, but and since I can commute to Albacon, I can still do that, but it's very hard to do anything else.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, this has been wonderful. I say this of all my guests, but I feel like, especially with our shared convention experience, it'd be like, just sitting down, in the con suite and having a chat and
Yeah.
talking stories.
This is pretty much what you do at a convention. Uh,
Exactly.
well, and the subjects can be, a friend of mine was Jan Howard Finder, was a big fan, and he said what they do with they talk is science fiction is what they talk about when there's no other subject to talk about. I mean, basically, you're talking about everything.
Oh, everything. You learned so much. Well, this is great. I will certainly have links to everything in the show notes. If you wouldn't mind, just let our listeners know. Do you have a website or is there one place where they can go to look up your books?
Unfortunately, I have a website, but I don't use it much. I'm basically going to update it now with that I have to have be promoting the books. I am on Blue Sky and Facebook as Chuck Rothman. Um, and if people wants to get in touch, that's fine. Um, you know, I I always like meeting a fan or someone who might buy something of mine. But every once in a while, yeah, it's funny because sometimes when someone remembers that actually has read some of my work, it's like, whoa, I someone once I was at a convention once and someone started in the audience had a question and he said, your story is such as I said, my story? Oh, wow, he's quoting my story. I said, oh, right, I wrote that, didn't I? So yeah, it's people can get me there. They probably could find me if they search for my name. Um, it'll probably show up. But I'm definitely on Facebook and definitely on Blue Sky.
Well, I highly recommend Blue Sky. I'm so glad that I have really joined the communities there. There's some wonderful conversations that happen. And, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. And best of luck with that new novel. Do let us know once you have a release date and I'll
Thank
make
you.
sure and spread the
I'll,
word.
I'll spread the word. I certainly will spread the word. I will say I just found out who's going to be the artist. Now I'm going to remember who it is. Um, uh, oh yeah, Ron. What's his name? Ron Miller, who's won a Hugo and done a lot of. He does a lot of space art, which I don't know why, how it fits in, but yeah, I'm sure he's good enough to handle it.
Awesome. Well, that is great. Great. Well, well, again, thank you so much for being here and thanks for being on Right Talk Wednesday.
All right. Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.